In the age of the internet, one of the most prolific topics of discussion has become lost media. The idea has always intrigued me. Films, photos, or any kind of media being lost and never being able to be recovered in a time where we have access to virtually anything is fascinating to me. In recent years, a large community has formed dedicated to finding specific disturbing pieces of lost media. From the elusive, disturbing anime Go for a Punch to the memorabilia created by serial killers, the iceberg of disturbing lost media goes deep, and I want to dive into those depths. I'm Nightmare Movies, and today I want to discuss some of the most disturbing lost media of all time.
You don't have to be seduced, hostile, sinful world.
This is perhaps the sickest group ever promoted by a mainstream record company.
I wouldn't say a single word to them. I would listen to what they have to say, and that's what no one did.
Marilyn Manson is no stranger to controversy. The release of his breakthrough album, 1996's Antichrist Superstar, was met with extreme backlash. Not only that, but protesters were abundant during the subsequent tour the same year.
If they're going to have an atmosphere here that praises Satan, we're going to lift Jesus higher.
Even beyond his music, Manson has personally been the center of attack and quote-unquote linked to a number of tragedies.
Definitely can see why they would pick me, because I think it's easy to throw my face on a TV because I'm, in the end, sort of a poster boy for fear.
Most famously being blamed for the Columbine massacre, the two shooters were alleged to be wearing Marilyn Manson t-shirts during the shooting. This isn't even the only school shooting Manson has been pinned to. In 2007, a student in Louisiana held one of his teachers at gunpoint, demanding them to say,
"Hail Marilyn Manson."
After the teacher refused, the student fired 2 shots at their head before committing suicide. School shootings aren't the only crimes that Manson has been blamed for. In the year 2000, a nun was murdered by 3 schoolgirls in Italy, with their diaries reportedly containing numerous references to and even pictures of Manson. Soon after, Manson was arrested in Rome for allegedly tearing off his genitals. Manson went on to say that the arrest was politically motivated following his implication in the murder by Italian tabloids. On June 30th, 2003, Jodi Jones, a 14-year-old girl, was brutally murdered in Scotland. Her mutilated body was discovered in a woodland near her home, with her injuries said to be closely resembling those of Elizabeth Short, or as most people know her, the Black Dahlia. 10 months later, Jones's boyfriend, then 15 years old, was arrested on suspicion of the murder. Police confiscated a copy of The Golden Age of Grotesque containing Manson's short film Doppelhers during a search, which had been purchased 2 days after Jones's death. A 10-minute excerpt from the film, as well as several paintings created by Manson depicting the Black Dahlia's mutilated body, were presented as evidence during the trial. The boy was found guilty of her murder and was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison. This is all to showcase how controversial and influential Manson had seemingly been. His art has always been contentious and, sometimes through no fault of his own, attached to tragedy. But what exactly is the lost media? Well, sometime in the 1990s, Manson shot a short film entitled Groupie, a short found-footage horror film following a Manson superfan as she undergoes one of the worst nights of her life. At the time, there were only allegedly 3 people who had actually seen the film: Manson himself, Manson's former manager Tony, and Andy Dick. And in 2002, Manson and Dick briefly spoke about the film.
I won't go into the details of this film, but I made this movie that I had intentions of putting onto my home video, not thinking that it would offend.
Well, see, it was disgusting. So it's just more of a freak show. It's totally not, it's great TV. It's great film.
Did you get it distributed?
No, because when I showed it to my manager, he said, "Please hide the masters. If anyone sees it, you'll go to jail and your career will be over."
The short, according to the two, starts with an actual house party that Manson was throwing. Manson and his former bassist/guitarist, Twiggy, were engaging in sexual acts when suddenly the doorbell rings. Standing in the doorway is the titular Groupie. She tells Manson that she's a huge fan and he invites her in. Over time, Manson convinces her to do more and more depraved things. Past that, very few details are known, but Andy states that at one point she drank urine from a wine glass. Eventually, a gun is introduced into the scenario, and she ends up being tied up. The film was obviously never released outside of a brief snippet included in Manson's documentary Dead to the World. The contents of the film and their legitimacy have been a huge point of controversy for Manson. The film was brought up as recently as 2021 in different lawsuits pertaining to Manson. The allegations on the film lean into the more outrageous, claiming that it's a borderline snuff film and implying that the girl in the video is actually dead by the end. Now, of course, saying that Marilyn Manson created a snuff film at a house party he was throwing is ridiculous. Manson responded to these allegations, claiming that the film was completely scripted, that it had been directed by photographer Joseph Koltais, and that it had starred his ex-girlfriend Paula Weiss. Paula has also done a number of interviews dispelling the myths about the film.
He asked me to do an acting job, and I did it, and it was used for the same purposes that a commercial film would be used for, So if he hired you to do some film work, you got the film work. Yeah.
It's hard not to be transfixed by the extreme content Groupie potentially portrays, but this film is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of lost media, and it only gets worse from here.
I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them.
In 1999, the Blair Witch Project changed horror films forever. It proved that with nothing more than a camera and a dream, anybody could make it in Hollywood. Or at least that's how director Blaine Norris supposedly viewed the film. You see, back in 2002, Blaine Norris came up with the idea for a feature film entitled Through a Hike, a Ghost Story. The film would follow a group of friends in the Appalachian Mountains being systematically and brutally killed by a ghost. A simple premise, but enticing. Blaine held auditions for his film and notably casted a man named Sean Gaston. Keep that name in mind for later. Everything seemed to be working out. Blaine had an investor who was willing to put up $18,000 for the film. He had a cast that was excited about the project, and his co-worker, Brian Trimble, offered to shoot the film on his own camera equipment. However, things didn't stay good for long. You see, Brian Trimble had shot some promotional material for the film, and to put it lightly, it had turned out poorly. Their huge investor told Blaine to fire Trimble after seeing this, and Blaine refused. Soon after, the investor walked away and took all of his money with him. Well, okay, no problem. Found footage films are notoriously cheap and easy to create. That is, if you have the proper resources. There was another roadblock on this journey, and it came from Trimble himself. See, he suffered from multiple sclerosis and wouldn't be able to make the challenging hike into the mountains. And not only that, Brian's then wife, Randy Trimble, was displeased with Brian spending so much time on this useless film. So, Brian could no longer participate, meaning there was no longer a camera team or even a camera to shoot the movie. But that wasn't going to stop Blaine. Even with all these mishaps, Blaine moved forward with the production to the confusion of his actors. One of the actors commented in an interview, wondering how Blaine still had money to shoot the project. But it was quickly overlooked and forgotten about, because you see, while they were filming the movie, the cast found Blaine to be a joy to work with. He never complained. Sure, he was obviously nervous, but he was an apparently good director. However, once filming had ended, problems came to the surface. See, Blaine was making a movie but needed money. And how did he get it? By racking up over $18,000 worth of credit card debt. This film had not only taken a financial toll on Blaine, but an emotional one as well. See, Blaine, soon after the wrap, had his marriage completely fall apart, leading to divorce. Cast members started slowly receiving less and less updates on the film until it was complete radio silence. Through a Hike, a Ghost Story, for all intents and purposes, was dead. So why am I talking about this film? Just another movie that didn't come to fruition. What's so special about that? Well, this is where the story takes a turn. See, on January 10th, 2003, something horrific had occurred. Brian Trimble called the police to report that his wife had been murdered. Police arrived to find Randy Trimble in their garage, stabbed 27 times and strangled with an extension cord. A scene straight out of a horror movie, even described in a similar way by one of the detectives on the case, quote, "This was like a TV set, like I'd walked into a movie set." Now, it doesn't take a genius detective to figure out who did it. The sole suspect at the time was Brian. However, this is where things start to get complicated. Brian had claimed at the time he was over 40 minutes away at a TGI Fridays while the crime had taken place. The police followed up on his alibi, where both a friend of Brian's and a waitress at the restaurant confirmed his story. Though even with his alibi, detectives were adamant that Brian was the killer. They just couldn't prove it. So for the next 4 months, police kept pressure on Brian, hoping for a confession. They would come into his work unannounced to talk to him. They would kindly chat with him over the phone. They never wanted to overstep and scare Brian, but instead make him feel like this was never going to end. And one day, it worked. Brian went to go meet with police for his last time, though the truth of the situation wasn't what police had expected. You see, Brian didn't confess to the murder of his wife. He confessed that he hired his old friend Blaine to do it for him. Brian had promised Blaine a payment of $20,000 to murder his wife, Randy Trimble, just enough to cover Blaine's credit card debt for his feature film. After this confession, police spent months collecting evidence and eventually charged Blaine Norris with first-degree murder, and he eventually signed a plea deal for his confession to avoid the death penalty. And what is left out of this horrible, horrible tragedy? The only thing that's left is the film that was the source of all of this. To this day, no one has seen the completed film Through a Hike, A Ghost Story. However, one of the actors, Sean Gaston, as mentioned earlier, made a documentary about the incident that aired on Dateline NBC all the way back in 2009. If this case interests you at all, I highly recommend checking it out. So far, we've covered a disturbing short film, and a movie that led to a terrible tragedy, but there's one last piece of disturbing media that I want to take a look at today. Trepanation is one of the oldest surgical procedures known to man. The process involves drilling a hole into the human skull, with the reasoning being widely varied throughout cultures and time. Originally, in ancient times, it was used to expel evil spirits from a person who was believed to be possessed or simply just acted abnormally. During the Neolithic period, the bone that was trepanned from a human was worn to ward off evil spirits. Evidence of trepanation spans across all cultures through all periods of time, even into our modern times. Procedures that slightly predated the lobotomy were performed by cutting a hole into the skull, inserting an instrument, and destroying parts of the brain. All of this is to give context to the final piece of lost media for today. Fast forward to the 1970s, and we are introduced to the subject of that film, Amanda Fielding. Fielding, from a young age, had a keen interest in consciousness and mysticism. In her pursuit of further education, she studied a wide variety of subjects connected to those interests. In 1966, she had discovered the practice of trepanation. All of her curiosities had led her to a hypothesis. Trepanation allows for increased blood circulation, allowing people to achieve and sustain a higher level of consciousness. She theorized that children experience this before their cranial bones fuse. An interesting subject matter, and she talks about it extensively on an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience.
The hypothesis of trepanation, allowing that expansion on the heartbeat to the full expansion of the systolic pressure, which the child has until it starts to close over. You're just at a slightly lower level in terms of energy for the brain.
But how could one test this hypothesis? Well, Amanda had a very unique idea. In 1970, Amanda had filmed a documentary entitled Heartbeat in the Brain. Now, what is this documentary about? Well, it's a 12-minute short where Amanda performs a trepanation on herself, filming the entire process. Probably one of the most insane scientific experiments ever recorded. And it was screened in New York in 1978 to an audience where one person fainted. Footage of it was released in a 1998 documentary as well, entitled A Hole in the Head. And past that, the only other time the documentary was shown in its entirety was in 2011 at the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London. Now, when it comes to lost media, this one is confirmed to not be lost. You can view screenshots of the film and even watch 2 minutes of it on YouTube. Though for obvious reasons, I will not be showing it in this video. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like every other movie on this list that Heartbeat in the Brain will ever be seen again. Therefore, it's put under the moniker of lost media. So there you have it, 3 of the most disturbing films you'll never be able to watch. Thanks for watching my video. I'm Nightmare Movies, and I'll see you guys next time.